and welcome to our webinar on Warehouse Manager for Sage X3. A very busy slide here, but this is a summary of everything that we are able to do in Warehouse Manager from a functional perspective. And we cover the whole warehousing value chain from receipts, moves, picks, and counts. Today's webinar is focused on how Warehouse Manager is able to utilize the global standard barcode known as GS1. And we're going to begin with an overview of the GS1 standard and its core uses and benefits. As we move into the live demonstrations, today's webinar is not so much about specific workflows, but more about the GS1 standard. We'll therefore start by processing a miscellaneous receipt, a fairly simple business transaction. And this will be done in two parts. The first part will use standard barcodes to receive a quantity of stock, something that we showed in last month's webinar on stock receipts. And the second part will use a GS1 barcode to receive the same quantity of stock, but this time we will see how the application identifiers are decoded and mapped inside Sage. We will also appreciate the operational differences around using each type of barcode. The second demonstration is around how we use GS1 codes to do sales order picking, quite a large part of what we do in Warehouse Manager. And the third and final part, we'll take a quick look at how Warehouse Manager is able to generate stock labels that include a GS1 barcode. And as always, we'll elaborate on each part as we progress. So before we start any live demonstrations, let's take a quick look at the GS1 standard. And GS1 is it's a global barcode standard which is produced by the GS1 organization. It's made up of 115 not-for-profit regional operations operating across 150 countries worldwide. And GS1 standards now play their part around the world and around the clock for scanning supermarket groceries or buying products online through marketplaces like Amazon and eBay to locating equipment in a hospital quickly enough to save someone's life. In fact, there are over 5 billion successful scans of a GS1 barcode every single day. And today we're going to look at how we have embraced these standards within Warehouse Manager to allow this same benefit to be made available to all Sage X3 users. So the GS1 standard uses unambiguous identification keys referenced as application identifiers to identify individual stock characteristics. And within the standard, there are about 800 application identifiers. But typically, most organizations will use only a small number of them when constructing a specific barcode. And stock data can be encoded into different barcode symbologies for use within our warehouse management system. The use of GS1 barcodes is enabled across business transactions within Warehouse Manager. And finally, GS1 can also be encoded as a linear code as well as a two-dimensional code, like, for example, a QR code. However, in our examples today, we are going to be using 4 out of the 800 or so application identifiers. And the following GS1 barcode is similar to the construct that we'll be using throughout today's webinars. So the 4 application identifiers that we're going to use are UPC, or Global Trading Identification Number. It's often referred to as the JITIN, the lot number, expiry date, and you may notice actually that this is in reverse format of year, month, and day, and of course the stock quantity. And these application identifiers are very much in line with the kinds of stock that we would typically process using Warehouse Manager. But not only can we see the identifiers, we can also see their associated data values. And note that the brackets around the identifiers are only human readable and not part of the barcode itself. And as we shall see later, a GS1 enabled scanner will decode the individual identifiers, extract each data item, and then map to Sage accordingly. And the key point here, however, is that this will be done in a single scan, and hence the time saving and power of GS1. However, and more importantly, as this batch of stock moves throughout the supply chain, this same barcode will be used by all entities, whether they're receiving, moving, issuing, or counting this particular batch of stock. And this means, as we will demonstrate, that at the time of picking a globally allocated sales order, we will, by means of the embedded lot number held within the GS1 barcode, detail allocate the product and lot number at pick time. So what are the benefits of adopting this particular standard? Well, the first benefit is traceability. And fundamentally, every entity within the supply chain uses the same barcode, and means that as a batch of stock moves from entity A to entity B and so on, the associated batch details will be the same in all of the ERP systems, Sage or otherwise. And this is rather like EDI, but without the need to move data files. The second benefit is accuracy. And this may actually come as a surprise, but manual data entry is still one of the main causes of data inaccuracies in supply chain management, including the manual entry on a handheld where no barcode is present for one reason or another. And the use of the GS1 standard therefore enforces the use of handhelds. And this means that data accuracy in GS1 is nearing 100%. The third key benefit is that a single barcode can hold more than one piece of information. And in our live demonstrations, we will be using 4 data items. And this again significantly reduces any errors around data cross-referencing when batches of stock move around the supply chain, and boils down to the fact that all entities are using the same barcode and means their ERP systems will all have the same data. And there are also operational advantages. And as you'll see in our demonstrations, the use of a GS1 can significantly reduce the number of scans required. The industries that would typically adopt the GS1 standard are those such as healthcare, pharmaceuticals, and food service, plus industries like automotive and aerospace, where stock traceability and accuracy are either critical or possibly a legal requirement. And as a side of thought, as the quantity can be encoded into a GS1 code, it is possible to use this to handle variable weighted product, as each barcode will hold the quantity of an item, and hence at pick time, we do not have to rely on the picker to enter any quantity information. We're going to show you this later. Okay, I'm now going to switch into Sage and run the live demonstrations. Okay, so we're going to be using Sage X3 version 12 today, but everything that we're going to be looking at today is equally relevant to versions 9 and 11. And to run the demonstrations, I'm going to be using a client handheld simulator, rather like the one displayed, which is based on a Zebra MC device. So at this point, it's worth mentioning that we are actually hardware agnostic. A warehouse manager will run on Android, Windows Mobile, as well as industry standard tablets and PC devices. So all of the current client supported devices that we have approved to run Warehouse Manager are GS1 enabled, and the PDF is downloadable from the Datalinks website. So before we begin, and for reasons that will become apparent, today's webinar will include perhaps a little more talk than normal. Demonstrating the GS1 standard will, as we're about to see, require very few scans, and showing Warehouse Manager working with GS1 doesn't really require that much effort. What we do want to do, however, is talk through the various processes and setups so that our audience really understands not only how powerful the GS1 standard is, but how effectively Warehouse Manager processes these kinds of barcodes, and how this is reflected in the workflow on the handheld. So let's begin by logging on to the handheld. So using the handheld as an example, you can see that I've got a number of menu options available, and these are all configurable and are based on a user role, and that's something that you will have control over. So the user interface on the handheld has been designed to be fully touchscreen. So there are no function keys or stylus pens needed to do anything that I'm about to show you. So let's take a look at our first demonstration scenario, which introduces us to how a scanner is able to decode a GS1 barcode. And as we mentioned in the introduction, we're going to base all of today's demonstrations on a GS1 barcode that uses 4 application identifiers. And this is the actual barcode that I'm going to use in the first demonstration. And as we can see, there are 4 application identifiers. It's very similar to the one we saw in the introduction. So the first is the O1 identifier, and this is the JIT-in, and it's found on all GS1 codes. And this is a unique identifier for this particular stock item and will not be used for any other stock item in any system that uses GS1. And these are issued by the GS1 Standards Organization and are unique globally. So this reference number is held within X3 as the UPC field on the product record. This particular UPC is 14 characters long and therefore follows the JIT-in-14 description within the GS1 standard, the details of which are available on the GS1 website. So the second identifier is the lot number, and this was created by the entity within the supply chain that created the batch of stock in the first place. Unlike in standard receipts where Sage may auto-generate a lot number, something that we demonstrated in last month's webinar, when we scan a GS1 barcode that includes the lot number, this is the one that will be stored on the receipt within Sage. And more importantly, however, this is a common lot number for this batch of stock and will be used by the whole supply chain and will ensure that all entities are actually speaking the same language, so to speak. So the next identifier is the expiry date. And this is actually done in reverse format of year, month, and day. Again, this date was set when the product was originally manufactured. And the fourth and final identifier is the quantity. And this is the quantity of items held within the batch. And in our particular example, it's 50. So there are our 4 identifiers for today's demonstrations, and we will be returning to this a number of times as we progress. We're now going to do a miscellaneous receipt on a lot managed product, but before we do anything GS1 related, we're going to start by recapping on how a miscellaneous receipt works operationally. So I'm going to start off by receiving a quantity of sugar, a product that's typically lot managed and will require an expiry date. And I've already set up the product inside Sage to enable this particular demonstration. So now let's go onto the handheld and receive in a quantity of this stock item. So I'm going to select receipts, followed by miscellaneous receipts into dock. And as you can see, I've set up the handheld to default the status to accepted and the target location to dock. In other words, we're receiving into the dock with an accepted status. And these are simple default settings on the handheld. So I will start by scanning the product code. And that's followed by a lot number and an expiry date. So this product has been set up with a 180-day expiry date, and the date in grey can either be accepted or overridden. I'm just going to accept that, so I'll just tap through. And finally, I need to enter a quantity, and I'm going to be bringing in 40 of those. And I will be able to confirm that receipt. And that was a successful receipt. Nothing too complicated. So now let's run the same process again, using the same product, but this time using a GS1 barcode, and see how the handheld behaves. As before, we're receiving into the dock with a status of accepted, and this is the barcode that I'm going to be using. So to quickly recap, this particular barcode holds 4 data items. So now let's see what happens. So in the product field, I will this time scan a GS1 barcode. So on the screen, we can see that the UPC has been decoded by the scanner and derived the sugar product. We can also see that the lot number and the expiry date and quantity have all been decoded by the scanner and mapped to the relevant fields on the handheld. So now to complete the receipt, all I need to do is confirm. And that was a successful posting. So what we've seen here are two identical examples, but done using different barcodes. So if we take a look at the first example, we needed to scan two separate barcodes, those being the product and the lot, plus of course manual entry of the expiry date and quantity. If we look at the GS1 barcode further down, all of those four data items were encoded as a single barcode. And that meant only one thing, two scans and two data entries down to a single scan. Job done. So over and above the decoding and mapping of a GS1 barcode, there is a clear operational advantage of using a GS1 code in this particular instance, in that a single scan captures four data items, and these were the ones held within the barcode itself. So processing stock transactions using GS1 not only enables a common language across the supply chain, but can also reduce the amount of scanning required to do warehouse operations. And this is something that we've endeavoured to capitalize on in how Warehouse Manager works with the GS1 standard. We're only showing a very small subset of what is possible with GS1 codes within Warehouse Manager. But nevertheless, that actually completes our demonstration around miscellaneous receipts and GS1 decoding and mapping. Okay, so the next demonstration is an example about how we can use GS1 codes in the sales order picking process, a large part of what we do in Warehouse Manager. Before we process anything, I've already created a sales order for a quantity of product and created a pick ticket. And so let's go and take a look so that we know where we are. Pick tickets. And we're going to be processing 92. So what we have here is we're going to be picking 100 imperial pounds worth of baking flour. The order has been globally allocated, and so we will need to confirm the lot of stock that we're consuming, and this will be done at pick time. So what does the GS1 barcode look like for these particular items, or for this particular example? Again, the barcodes in this example follow the same format as in the previous demonstration, where we're using four application identifiers that include the lot information and a quantity. The only key difference being that we're using a different product, and so obviously the UPC is going to be different. So in this next demonstration, we're going to pick a quantity of 100 from across 3 batches, and the GS1 codes that we can see are the ones we're going to use. And the batch quantities all equal 100, just as we require. So we've got 50, 35, and 50. So now let's go and pick that actual order. So back on the handheld, I'm going to select picking and issues, followed by incremental sales order pick and ship. And I have set up the picking process to create a shipment once this picking has been completed. But in the same way as any other pick inside Warehouse Manager, I could pick to the pack bench and run as 2 separate processes if I wanted. The use of GS1 codes does not in any significant way change the core workflows. If anything, the workflows will be shorter, rather like in the previous demonstration example. So I'm picking by pick ticket, and I'm going to be picking number 92, which is the one we saw earlier on. And here is the line item that I'm going to pick. So I'm going to select that line item. And in the same way as any other standard sales order pick, I'm being guided to a location as to where to find the required stock. In this particular example, the baking flour product is only held in one location. And so on arrival, I will scan that location accordingly. And the handheld lists the line item details, including the quantity that I need to pick. And given that I'm using global allocations, I'm not being prompted for any particular lot. I will, as in any global allocation, confirm this at pick time. And this data will, as we've already seen, be taken from the GS1 barcode. However, because the quantity is also held within the GS1 code, I have set up the handheld to accept this quantity. And to do this, I'm using incremental scanning within Warehouse Manager. And I will not have to enter a quantity on the handheld, as in this case, a single increment is the quantity on the GS1 code. So let's pick the first batch, which has a quantity of 50. So I'll scan the first of the 3 GS1 codes. And a number of things have happened here. The UPC has derived the correct product, which is flour. And the lot number that I'm picking has been confirmed at the same time, plus, of course, the quantity of 50, and the handheld has reduced the remaining pick quantity by this amount. And all that happened in a single scan. So I can now confirm that pick. And I could actually switch on auto confirm and also switch off that acknowledgement message to speed up the process even more. But obviously for today, I want to go through the workflow. So now I can scan the next batch of stock, the one that has a quantity of 35. And obviously I can confirm that transaction, and that leaves a quantity of 15 to pick. So I will scan the last one. And I can confirm that. That's that pick ticket completed, all postings successful. And that was the pick ticket completed. Okay, so to recap, what we have done is pick a quantity of stock across a number of batches of variable weight. And because the weight quantity was part of the GS1 code, we didn't have to enter a pick quantity like we would have done in a standard sales order pick. We also didn't have to select the lot number, unlike we would have to do in standard stock labels. One single scan of a GS1 code did a number of things for us with regards to the workflow on the handheld. In many respects, GS1 automates much of the workflow, depending, of course, which application identifiers are being used. So this demonstration shows just how powerful GS1 codes are when doing sales order picking, especially when lot and quantity data are held inside the barcode. One scan can do a lot of things and can save so much time, especially in high volume picking environments. And that actually completes the second of our demonstrations. Okay, so the third and final part of today's demonstration is about how Warehouse Manager is able to create a GS1 barcoded label. And up until now, we have effectively been showing how we process GS1 barcodes. But here we're going to take a quick look at how stock is GS1 labeled. In Warehouse Manager, we would typically create a GS1 code at the end of the work order receipt process. And label printing is set up inside Sage through the additional set of menu items that we have added, and would therefore appear in your installation when you purchase Warehouse Manager. So let's go and take a quick look at this now. That's our menu there. And we're going to be looking at label maintenance from our menu. So the screen has listed all of the label types that have been set up in my particular demonstration environment. And the type that I'm going to use for generating a label with a GS1 code happens to be called TON3, which is there. And in particular, the label body screen will enable me to build my own label. And the line that I'm currently highlighting is the one that is used to define the application identifiers that make up the GS1 label, and of course, in which order. And from the line, we can see yet again the 4 identifiers that we touched upon throughout today's webinar, 01, 10, 17, and 30. So when a work order is received, this type of label definition will include the UPC, lot number, expiry date, and quantity. So as this batch of stock is then used later in the supply chain, this barcode will be used by the receiving entity to run their receipt process, and the UPC and lot related data will remain constant throughout the supply chain and thus enable full traceability. And that's how we can use the GS1 standard to create a globally integrated supply chain with full traceability and 100% or near 100% data accuracy. And it's also a good point to summarize today's demonstrations. Okay, so to summarize, we've taken a look at how Warehouse Manager processes barcodes that use GS1. And we started off by providing an overview of the standard, its main benefits and target industries. We then had a look at the miscellaneous receipt process, a simple business transaction. Beginning with a standard barcode, we processed a simple receipt into Sage through the handheld. We then showed exactly the same process using a GS1 barcode and was able to compare and contrast the operational differences. The key one being the lesser number of scans, as much of the batch data was held within the GS1 code. The second demonstration was all about sales order picking using GS1 codes, and of course how we can use a GS1 code with an encoded quantity to do a sales order pick across a number of batches with varying quantities. And of course, in our final demonstration, we showed how we were able to create a GS1 barcode using the label maintenance capability that we have added to the core X3 product. But ultimately, and as we have shown, albeit using a small number of business transactions, the GS1 standard enables the globally integrated supply chain that has full traceability and near 100% data accuracy. So moving on to the final slide before we open up for questions and answers. As we showed earlier, Warehouse Manager is able to do a lot of things. And this slide really reminds us of the true extent of functionality to which Datalink's Warehouse Manager for Sage X3 is able to deliver. And today's webinar has been focused on how Warehouse Manager works with the GS1 standard, functioning that is global within the application. But we have looked at this in the context of receipt of inbound stock using a GS1 code from supplier entry, a sales order pick and ship, and how we design and create a GS1 code, something that typically happens at the end of the work order receiving process. And that is just 4 or 5 items on the list. And of course, we'd like to have shown everything here on this slide today, but clearly in the interest of time, this has not really been feasible. And the parts that we could show you will depend on your specific requirements. And so please let us know if you require a more comprehensive demonstration. And so that is Warehouse Manager and concludes today's webinar. So thank you once again for attending, and I hope that you found it interesting.